Hello there guys, what is going on? Son of Chelsea back here again for another edition of Added Time, answering your questions that you kindly submitted for today's video. Going to get into all that good stuff, some interesting topics after yesterday's game against Spurs to discuss in today's episode. But before we get into any of that good stuff, I want to ask you guys, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Also hit the like button if you're enjoying the content because it helps out the channel as well. Let's get into your questions as we do every Monday. Firstly here from TY7, who asks, has Kai Havertz lost his place in the starting 11? Cover, Kante, Mason is working really well and all playing well. Does he start over any of them? I think it's harsh to say that Kai lost his place because, you know, obviously he was diagnosed with COVID, tested positive and then had to self-isolate for a couple of weeks. We then had the international break and he's obviously now starting to find his fitness. I think he'll be back in the starting 11 very soon. I wouldn't be stunned if he's starting, say, against Sevilla on Wednesday night. It's going to be a hectic couple of weeks. I think Kai, now with the formation settled and sort of, I think Lampard sticking to this 4-3-3 now for the foreseeable future, I think that's going to help sort of certainty within that midfield finally. And I think that Kai will eventually get back into the team with the quality he has. I think there are certain games where you feel like Cover can do really well, whilst other games that Kai can come back into and really flourish as well. So no, I don't feel about that. I mean, I look at Mason Mount, incredibly fit player, obviously has an amazing engine on him, but he will need a rest sooner rather than later, especially during the next few weeks as we get closer to Christmas. It's going to be absolutely mental, and I'm pretty sure that Kai will be featuring in the first team. And then when he does get into that first team, it's about him taking that chance. I think it's more likely that it's between him and Cover for that place in that midfield three. I think Kante and Mason's performance levels have been so high, but Cover had a brilliant game yesterday, so it's going to be difficult. And I think this is the sort of the challenge and sort of the competition Frank would want in that midfield area because it is so stacked. But I wouldn't concern too much about Kai. I think he will eventually get in that midfield, likely over Kovacic, but you may see Mason rotate as well with Havertz as well over the next couple of games. Flea White asks, do you prefer Billy Gilmour getting some Champions League action, or rotating too much can cost us points? That definitely is a concern. I mean, it's great to see now Billy Gilmour getting those minutes for the academy development sides recently, getting back to some sort of match fitness. I think it's very difficult at the moment under the current circumstances with the way players are training. I think in terms of bubbles, Frank Lampard talks a lot about this, how players coming back from injury, it's very hard to replicate sort of match sort of intensity in the current sort of pandemic. So it's difficult to know when Billy will come back into the first team. I'm sure he'll be in a squad soon. I think with the FA Cup third round around the corner, I think that's a great opportunity for Billy to get some minutes, return to the first team. That final Champions League group game next week, isn't it, against Krasnodar, I think potentially could be that game. I think a lot of it depends on what happens on Wednesday night. I think if that game becomes a bit of a dead rubber, in a sense that Chelsea are in a really good position, maybe we win or draw on Wednesday, and then, in terms of that game, having a little bit less pressure on it for who comes first, and Chelsea have sort of sealed that already, and of course qualification as well, then you could see more fringe players come into that starting 11, and I think Billy Gilmour, that'd be a good time potentially off the bench, or even starting potentially, because I do think Frank obviously rates Billy Gilmour highly. We saw this last season. I do think he'll get some action this season. There have been some reports, I think, in recent weeks about potentially a loan in January to get him some minutes this season, because it's going to be very difficult, in January. I think once you get a player who's missed that amount of the season into the first team, but as we saw last season, Billy got into the team in March when we had a bit of an injury crisis. So I think he will return at some point this season to the first team. Kazam asks, how concerning is our record in the big games this season? I'm not that concerned based on what I've seen so far this season in terms of development defensively, the way Frank Lampard manages these games. I'd be more concerned, last season the issue was in these games, I think Chelsea went toe-to-toe with a lot of big teams, but would end up losing the game narrowly, potentially because of our defensive frailties. I think Frank is looking at these games, and based on where the table is at the moment, Chelsea being very close to the top of the table, sort of assessing that in games like yesterday where it's so tight, you don't want to lose those games. It'd be really demoralising to lose yesterday. So I think, managing it well, getting another clean sheet, I think there's momentum there. You can see the defensive improvement. I think the thing for me in these games, you don't want to see Man United type games or even Sevilla type games too often, where Chelsea aren't providing any threat in front of goal. I don't think that was the case yesterday. I think Chelsea were providing a threat, and I think had the balance of attack and defence very well, in truth. And that's been an issue under Frank Lampard, and I think he's starting to rectify that. I think it's just about taking that final step, right? I'm not that concerned. I think, the Liverpool defeat, I think, came a little bit too early in the season. I would have liked to have played Liverpool right now in terms of our team and seeing how we've clicked recently. If it keeps on happening, and I think, if Chelsea's form deteriorates in other games, if Chelsea keep winning the games we're supposed to against teams you'd expect Chelsea to beat, and we keep on picking up points, and say Chelsea go on another winning run before, say, we play Arsenal, that would be considered another big game, or Man City post-Christmas. And Chelsea then can go into those games, if we're right at the top of the table, they're not must-win games. They're lovely games to win. If Chelsea can put a run of wins together between those massive games, I think that's not a massive issue, especially away from home. I think, 0-0 draws or draws away from home at very difficult grounds, I think are always a positive result. So yeah, it's difficult to judge. We're still very early on in the season, right? And I think in terms of yesterday and people getting really pessimistic about it, which I think is surprising, because I think it was a decent result yesterday. I think, we're so early on in the season. It's really what you do after that, right? When we had the 0-0 draws against Sevilla and Man United, you wanted to see Chelsea then go on and have a winning run, which we did right before this game. You want to see the same now. It's going to be a little bit more difficult because Chelsea have some tricky fixtures over the next couple of weeks against some really good teams. But if Chelsea put another run of wins together before, say, the Arsenal Man City games, then I don't think you can majorly complain, right? So I think it's all about balance and nuance and looking at the perspective of the season, where we were last season. I think you need to take a lot of things into consideration. I'm impressed by Lampard's sort of management defensively of these games, because there has been improvement definitely from last season. Hassab asks, Tammy is a good player, no doubt on that, but I think Olivier Giroud deserves to start matches now. I do agree that I think that it's likely Giroud maybe will come back into the team now. I wouldn't be stunned if he starts the game against Sevilla. I was disheartened but not majorly surprised by the negativity towards Tammy yesterday. I mean, unfortunately, it's just the way we view football. Unfortunately, it's the way some people look at football, right? It has to always be a case of either brilliant or awful. There's no in between. There's no nuance, really. Tammy has been one of Chelsea's most consistent, most potent, most impressive players so far this season. You cannot argue against that, because the stats prove that. As I said in my team selector for Spurs, Tammy absolutely earned the right to start that game. He was, really impressing. I think he's really improved aspects of his game. He has a disappointing game in front of goal, and then suddenly he's the worst striker, and suddenly we need to sell him. I know that's not a majority of people. I think a majority of Chelsea fans don't feel like that, but it's frustrating, right? He has a frustrating day in front of goal. I think Tammy will be frustrated with himself in a big game. He scored in big games before for Chelsea. But I think for Tammy, maybe it's a good time to rest, rotate players. I think Giroud's such a good player, a good option to bring off the bench. I felt a little bit frustrated, as I said in my review, that Giroud didn't come off the bench earlier. I think Giroud will get more minutes. I think a lot of players will just get more minutes. I think this is what's going to happen now, because as we go into this very crazy period, I think you'll see players that haven't played in recent weeks start to get into the team just very naturally, as Lampard has to rotate. He's going to be forced to do it. So I think Giroud will get more minutes, absolutely. But don't write off Tammy Abraham. He's had a really good start to the year. He's been really impressive, and one game doesn't change that for me. And finally, Lucid Footwear and Clothing, Lucid FC, great guys. Were very kind to send some gear over to me. The hat I wear regularly now. Absolutely love their gear, so please go and check their stuff out. Asking here, do you play FIFA 21 career mode? If so, as management or player with Chelsea FC? Cheers from Atlanta, Georgia. Thank you for that question. In terms of FIFA 21, I actually haven't bought FIFA 21 this year. I'm still playing FIFA 20. I've sort of held back. I usually end up buying a new FIFA, but this year I've sort of laid back on that. I'm not as interested in buying a new FIFA. I do play career mode. That's sort of the only game mode I play on FIFA, and I don't really play with Chelsea that much, I have to be honest. Sometimes when I play FIFA, I'll start it, I'll use Chelsea instantly, and that'll be like one of my first career modes. But I get bored of playing Chelsea. I'm more interested in going, say, to a League 2 side, like Macclesfield or someone like that, and taking them up, say, to the Premier League. I find that much more interesting. I think in terms of career mode, how repetitive it is, I think it's much more interesting to take a lower team and take them up to glory, basically. That's sort of what I do on my career modes. But yeah, in terms of FIFA 21, haven't got it yet. I'm not sure if I will buy it. I think, FIFA has become quite repetitive over the recent years, and not a lot changes between games. I may eventually pick it up, but yeah, I do play career mode, and I don't really play as much as player. I'm more interested in being a manager on FIFA career mode. But that is it for this edition of Added Time. Thank you guys so much for taking the time to watch this video. If you did enjoy it, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Follow me on Twitter @SonofChelsea, and I'll see you again.